It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a golden glow over the wedding venue, where friends and family gathered to celebrate what everyone believed was the beginning of a beautiful journey. I stood in my wedding dress, every detail of the day unfolding like a dream. The vows had been exchanged, the promises made, and I looked into my husband's eyes, trusting that this was the man who would stand by my side through every storm. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of music as the evening wore on. I couldn't stop smiling. Everything felt perfect, or so I thought. But even amidst the joy, there were whispers. Whispers of discontent, sharp glances, and forced smiles from my new mother-in-law. She had always been a looming presence in our relationship, overly involved, opinionated, and at times downright intrusive. Her disapproval of me was something I had grown accustomed to, though my husband always assured me that she would come around. She just needs time, he would say with a smile that made me believe him. Now, as the festivities began to wind down and the guests prepared to leave, I noticed her watching me from across the room. Her eyes held something I couldn't quite place, a mix of judgment and something darker, something unnerving. As the clock struck midnight and the last of the guests departed, my husband and I retired to our room. It was supposed to be a night of joy and intimacy, the first night of our married life. Instead, it became the night everything unraveled. The knock on the door came as I was removing the last of my jewelry. My husband opened it to find his mother standing there, her face set with determination. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, clutching a small box in her hands. "I need a word with you both," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. I glanced at my husband, confused, but he simply nodded and gestured for her to speak. That's when she opened the box, revealing a gleaming necklace, an heirloom, she said, that had been in their family for generations. "You must wear this tonight," she declared, looking directly at me. "It's tradition. Every bride in our family has done so." Her tone left little room for discussion, but there was something about the necklace, its gaudy design, the weight of it, that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just the necklace, it was the principle. The demand felt like a test, a way to assert her control over me even on my wedding night. "I appreciate the gesture," I said carefully, "but I think I'll pass. This doesn't feel right for me." Her eyes narrowed, and the room grew tense. My husband stood silently between us, his gaze darting back and forth as if unsure whose side to take. "You will wear it," she insisted, her voice rising. "It's not about you. It's about honoring this family. Or do you think you're too good for our traditions?" My heart raced as I tried to steady my voice. "With all due respect, this is my decision, and I'm not comfortable with it." I turned to my husband, hoping for support, but what I saw instead sent a chill through me. He looked defeated, as though he couldn't bear to stand up to her. "Just wear it," he muttered finally, his tone low. And in that moment, I realized the depth of the battle I was up against. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about control, about power, about the dynamics of a family I had just married into. What happened next would leave me shaken to my core and questioning everything about the man I had just vowed to spend my life with. The tension in the room was suffocating. My mother-in-law stood there, her gaze unyielding, her lips pursed into a thin line. The necklace, which she held up as if it were some sacred artifact, glimmered under the harsh light of the chandelier. My refusal had clearly offended her, but I couldn't back down. Not on this, not on the first night of my marriage. "It's just a necklace," she said sharply, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why must you make this difficult? Do you think you're above our family traditions?" My chest tightened. It wasn't the necklace itself that bothered me. It was the way it was being forced upon me, as though my worth as a wife depended on my willingness to comply. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I respect your traditions, but this is my wedding night. I'd like it to be about us, not about proving something to anyone else." Her face darkened and she turned to my husband, her son, the man I thought would defend me. "Are you going to let her talk to me like this? She's disrespecting our family." I looked at him, silently pleading for support, but instead of standing by my side, He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. It's not a big deal, he said softly, avoiding my gaze. Why don't you just swear it? For her sake. The word stung more than I could have imagined. For her sake? I repeated, incredulous. What about me? What about what I'm comfortable with? His silence spoke volumes. The next few moments passed in a blur. My mother-in-law launched into a tirade, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, and disrespectful. Her voice grew louder with each word, filling the room with venomous accusations. I tried to hold my ground, but the weight of her words, combined with my husband's passive compliance, was almost too much to bear. And then it happened. My husband stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. Enough, he snapped, his voice directed at me. Why can't you just do as she asks? Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Before I could respond, his hand shot out. The slap was quick, sharp, and unexpected. The sound echoed in the room, silencing everything else. For a moment, I couldn't process what had just happened. My cheek burned and my mind raced, replaying the moment in slow motion. My husband, my partner, my supposed protector, had struck me on our wedding night. The room spun as I stumbled back, clutching my face. Tears welled up in my eyes, not from the pain of the slap, but from the sheer humiliation and betrayal. My mother-in-law didn't seem shocked. If anything, she looked satisfied, as though this was the outcome she had expected all along. Maybe now she'll learn to respect this family, she muttered under her breath. I looked at my husband, searching for some sign of remorse, some indication that he realized the gravity of what he'd done. But all I saw was frustration, as though I were the one at fault for ruining the night. You're overreacting, he said, his tone dismissive. It's not a big deal. You're making this into something it's not. Not a big deal. The words echoed in my mind as I backed away, my hands trembling. My wedding night had turned into a nightmare, and the man I thought I knew had shown me a side of himself I couldn't ignore. I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My cheek was red, my makeup smudged, and my eyes swollen with tears. But more than that, I saw the cracks forming in the foundation of my marriage. This wasn't just about a slap. It was about control, power, and a family dynamic that left no room for me to have a voice. My mother-in-law's dominance, my husband's inability to stand up to her. It was all part of a toxic cycle that I had unknowingly stepped into. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, I began to replay every moment leading up to this night. The subtle red flags I had ignored. The way my husband always deferred to his mother. The way she always found a way to undermine me. The way my concerns were brushed aside as trivial. I had thought marriage would bring us closer, solidify our bond, and create a partnership built on love and respect. But instead, it had laid bare the cracks in our relationship, exposing truths I wasn't sure I could live with. The slap was a wake-up call, but it was also a turning point. As I sat there, tears streaming down my face, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could continue to shrink myself to fit into their mold, to comply with their unreasonable demands, to endure the humiliation for the sake of preserving peace. Or I could stand up for myself and demand the respect and love I deserved. But how? How do you confront a family dynamic so deeply entrenched? How do you fight for yourself when the person who promised to protect you becomes the source of your pain? I didn't have the answers that night. All I had was the searing pain of betrayal and the faint flicker of resolve in my heart. The morning after my wedding night, I woke up to a strange, hollow silence. My cheek still stung, and my heart felt heavier than it ever had before. My husband was already gone from the room, leaving nothing but an unmade bed and the weight of unresolved tension. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wedding ring on my finger. It no longer felt like a symbol of love. It felt like a chain. I needed clarity, but I didn't know where to start. The shame of what had happened kept me from picking up the phone and calling anyone. Who could I talk to? My family? My friends? Would they understand, or would they pity me? The thought of their pity was unbearable. Finally, After hours of sitting in silence, I called my closest friend, Sarah. She had been my rock during the planning of the wedding, always ready with a kind word or practical advice. I hesitated before dialing, but the moment I heard her voice, the floodgates opened. Sarah, I choked out, my voice trembling. Something happened last night. I told her everything. The necklace, the fight, the slap. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "You know this isn't normal, right? This isn't okay." Her words hit me like a wave. But it was just one moment, I argued weakly. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have. "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "This isn't about you. This is about him and his mother. And honestly, I've had my doubts about their relationship for a while." "What do you mean?" I asked, frowning. Sarah hesitated before continuing. "I didn't want to bring it up before, but I've seen how his mother treats you. Always criticizing, always trying to control you. And he never stops her. It's like he doesn't know how to say no to her." Her words made me pause. I thought back to the many moments I'd brushed off. His mother insisting on planning every detail of the wedding, her constant remarks about how I wasn't good enough for her son, the way my husband always seemed to shrink in her presence. I had excused it all, telling myself it was just the way their family operated. But now, in the light of what had happened, it was impossible to ignore. Over the next few days, I began piecing things together. I reflected on our relationship, analyzing every conversation, every argument, every moment where my husband had chosen his mother's wishes over mine. The signs were there all along, subtle, almost invisible, but now they stood out like glaring red flags. One night, I decided to confront him. He was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone, as though nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. He looked up, his expression guarded. "About what?" "About what happened on our wedding night. About the slap. About your mother." His face darkened. "I thought we were past that," he muttered. "Why do you have to keep bringing it up?" "Because it's not okay," I said, my voice rising. "You hit me on our wedding night. And instead of standing up for me, you let your mother treat me like I'm less than. How can you not see how wrong this is?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're overreacting. My mother just wanted to uphold tradition, and you made it into a big deal. If you had just listened to her, none of this would have happened." His words cut deep. "So it's my fault?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I didn't say that," he replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. The conversation went nowhere. Every time I tried to express how I felt, he deflected, made excuses, or dismissed my concerns entirely. It was like talking to a wall, and with each failed attempt, my frustration grew. Feeling stuck, I decided to seek advice from someone with more experience. I reached out to an older cousin, Priya, who had always been a voice of reason in my life. She listened patiently as I poured out my story, and when I was done, she said something that stayed with me. "This isn't just about the slap," Priya said. "It's about a pattern of behavior. His mother is toxic, yes, but the real issue is your husband. He's enabling her. Until he's willing to see that nothing will change." Her words struck a chord. I realized that I couldn't fix this on my own. If my husband wasn't willing to stand up for me, to stand up with me, then there was no foundation for us to build a life together. In the weeks that followed, I began to educate myself. I read articles about toxic family dynamics and enabling behavior. I sought out forums where women share their experiences with overbearing in-laws and unsupportive partners. And slowly, I began to see a way forward. I scheduled a meeting with a therapist, hoping to gain clarity and strength. In our sessions, I learned to set boundaries and recognize my own worth. I learned that love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity or enduring disrespect. But the most important lesson I learned was this: I couldn't force my husband to change. He had to want it for himself. The journey was emotionally draining, but with every step, I felt a little stronger, a little more resolute. I began to see the situation for what it was: a toxic cycle that I needed to break, not just for myself, but for my future. And while I still didn't have all the answers, one thing was clear: I deserved better. The decision to take control of my life came slowly but firmly, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, dark night. For weeks after that fateful wedding night, I had felt trapped, caught between my love for my husband and the growing realization that his mother's control over our lives was suffocating me. But one thing was clear: something had to change, and that change had to start with me. The first step was setting boundaries. It wasn't easy. My husband, Rohan, was still defensive, and his mother had become more passive-aggressive, trying to guilt me into compliance with remarks about how hard it is to welcome someone new into the family. One evening, she called to invite herself over for dinner. As usual, she had a list of demands, specific dishes I should cook, and even instructions on how I should decorate the table. I felt the familiar pang of anxiety rising in my chest, but this time I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. You're welcome to come over, but we'll keep things simple." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by a curt "fine." For the first time, I had stood up for myself, and though my hands were trembling as I hung up the phone, I felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. Setting boundaries with Rohan was harder. He oscillated between apologizing for the slap and defending his mother's actions. One night, after yet another argument where he tried to minimize my feelings, I said, "Rohan, I need you to hear me. What happened that night wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. If you can't see that, I don't know how we can move forward." He looked at me stunned. "I don't know how to change," he admitted quietly. "Then let's get help," I said. Together. For us. We started couples therapy a week later. The sessions were raw and uncomfortable, forcing us to confront truths we had both avoided. Rohan's therapist helped him recognize his enmeshment with his mother and the ways it had damaged our relationship. Meanwhile, my therapist encouraged me to rebuild my sense of self-worth and to prioritize my mental health. But progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when Rohan slipped back into old patterns, moments when I doubted my own strength. One evening, after a particularly heated session, I found myself wondering if any of this was worth it. That night, I called Sarah again. "What if he never changes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then you'll still be okay," she said firmly, "because you're already changing. You're already finding your strength." And she was right. Therapy wasn't just about saving our marriage. It was about saving myself. I started journaling daily, pouring out my fears, frustrations, and triumphs. I joined an online support group for women dealing with difficult in-laws, where I found solidarity and encouragement. Over time, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had lost: my love for painting, my passion for teaching, my ability to laugh without reservation. I took on more projects at work, throwing myself into tasks that made me feel capable and valued. As I grew stronger, I noticed small but significant changes in Rohan as well. He started standing up to his mother in subtle ways, telling her we couldn't always accommodate her demands, refusing to let her criticize me in his presence. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, after a particularly draining family dinner where his mother had been unusually harsh, Rohan turned to me and said, "I'm sorry. I see it now, the way she treats you. And it's not okay." His words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same side. But not every story ends in reconciliation. For some women in my support group, the journey toward empowerment meant walking away from toxic relationships altogether. Their courage inspired me, reminding me that staying was a choice, not an obligation. One day, I wrote myself a letter. In it, I listed everything I deserved in a partner: respect, kindness, support, and love without conditions. I promised myself that if Rohan couldn't meet those needs, I would let go, even if it broke my heart. Thankfully, he continued to grow. Our therapy sessions became less about addressing past hurts and more about building a healthier future. We started setting boundaries as a team, agreeing on how to handle his mother's interference. When she showed up unannounced one afternoon demanding to see the family heirloom necklace, Rohan calmly but firmly told her, "Mom, we've discussed this. That necklace belongs to my wife now, and she'll decide how it's used. The look of disbelief on her face was almost comical. For the first time, I felt truly seen and supported by my husband. But the biggest transformation was within myself. I had entered this marriage feeling small and uncertain, but I was leaving this chapter of my life as someone stronger, more confident, and unafraid to demand what I deserved. The ripple effects of this transformation touched every aspect of my life. My friendships grew deeper as I opened up about my struggles. My work thrived as I channeled my energy into projects I was passionate about. And most importantly, I learned to love myself again. Standing in front of the mirror one morning, I traced the faint outline of my wedding ring. It no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a symbol of the battles I had fought and won. It's been 2 years since that night, the night I stood my ground and began a journey I never anticipated. Looking back, I'm struck by how much has changed. That slap, as painful as it was, became a wake-up call, forcing me to reevaluate my understanding of love, respect, and self-worth. If you had told me then that I would one day look back on this chapter of my life with a sense of gratitude, I wouldn't have believed you. But today I can see that those dark moments led to growth and transformation, not just for me, but for Rohan as well. Rohan, and I made it through. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't guaranteed. There were moments when I thought about walking away, when the weight of his family's toxicity felt too heavy to bear. But as I set boundaries and reclaimed my voice, I began to see changes in him too. Therapy played a significant role in our healing. It helped him understand how his mother's behavior had conditioned him to prioritize her needs over his own happiness and mine. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but with time he learned to set boundaries with her as well. One of the most profound shifts happened the day Rohan apologized, not just for the slap, but for everything that led up to it. "I let you down," he said. "I was too scared to stand up to my mom, and you paid the price. I can't take back what happened, but I promise I'll do better." That moment marked a turning point. It wasn't just about the apology. It was about his willingness to take responsibility and grow alongside me. While our marriage found its footing, the most significant transformation happened within me. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationships, first as a daughter, then as a wife. But through this journey, I realized that my identity and worth didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I began to embrace the hobbies and passions I had once sidelined. Painting, which I hadn't touched since college, became my sanctuary. Each brushstroke felt like a reclaiming of myself, a reminder that I was capable of creating beauty, even in the midst of chaos. I also found strength in sharing my story. Joining an online support group for women in similar situations not only gave me a sense of community, but also allowed me to inspire others. Every time I shared my experiences, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control of my narrative. My relationship with Rohan's mother remains complicated. She has never fully acknowledged her role in what happened, and I've come to accept that she may never change. But I've learned to navigate interactions with her in a way that protects my peace. When she visits, the boundaries are clear. I no longer bend over backward to accommodate her unreasonable demands, and Rohan no longer enables her behavior. Her power over our lives has diminished, and though she occasionally tests those boundaries, I stand firm. My relationship with my own family, however, has deepened. Sharing my struggles with them opened doors for conversations we never had before about love, respect, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Their unwavering support reminded me that I wasn't alone, even in my darkest moments. This journey has taught me profound lessons about love and self-worth. I've learned that love should never come at the cost of your dignity. True love is rooted in respect, and any relationship, romantic or otherwise, that undermines your sense of self isn't worth holding on to. I've also learned the importance of setting boundaries, even when it feels uncomfortable. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier, more respectful relationships. By standing up for myself, I not only reclaimed my sense of self, but also encouraged Rohan to grow and evolve. Finally, I've learned that healing is an ongoing process. There are days when the memories of that slap resurface, when I feel a pang of doubt or fear. But those moments no longer define me. Instead, they remind me of how far I've come and how much I'm capable of overcoming. Today, I wake up each morning with a sense of peace I never thought possible. My marriage is far from perfect, but it's a partnership now, one built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to growth. Rohan and I recently celebrated our second wedding anniversary. Instead of an elaborate party, we opted for a quiet evening at home, cooking dinner together and reflecting on our journey. As we clinked glasses, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for myself, for having the courage to demand better and fight for the life I deserved. To anyone reading this who might find themselves in a similar situation, I want you to know that you're not alone. Standing up for yourself is hard, sometimes excruciatingly so, but it's also the most powerful thing you can do. Toxic dynamics thrive in silence, but the moment you speak up, you begin to take back your power. Whether that means setting boundaries, seeking help, or walking away, know that you have the strength to create the life you deserve. If I could go back and speak to the woman I was on my wedding night, the woman who felt shattered and betrayed, I would tell her this: you are stronger than you think. This moment doesn't define you, it propels you. And though the road ahead will be tough, you'll emerge on the other side stronger, wiser, and more in love with yourself than ever before. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's more than enough.